All right, so in this video, we're gonna take a deep dive into the bench press, and I'm gonna show you two of the most common bench press mistakes that almost anyone who isn't a powerlifter will make. And when it comes to the bench press, it makes all the sense to listen to the people who rely on maximal bench press ability, and that's predominantly gonna be the powerlifters. I mean, they're the strongest and they're the best at it, so we should probably do it their way. And that's exactly why people keep making these two very mistakes. The bench press then starts to look like the scary little demon in the corner of the gym who just wants to hurt and steal all of your gain.
What the fuck was that?
But if you listen to the powerlifters teach the bench press or argue about the setup and the execution, you'll always hear two very distinct positions being promoted. That's going to be a setup which allows for a big arch of the upper back and a wider hand placement on the bar. From a powerlifting perspective, it totally makes sense. But if you're into weightlifting, you just can't help but think about how silly it is to lay flat on your back and how your muscles tighten up just by looking at an empty bar on the bench. There's actually more to the bench press than what you see, especially if you need to be strong over your head. For powerlifters, they don't really need to be strong overhead. They just care about lifting the heaviest weight possible. And so they focus on figuring out how to manipulate their body so that it suits the exercise a little bit better. The bigger the arch that you can create and the wider hand placement, the bar then needs to travel a shorter distance. And in powerlifting, it's not just about the technical skill of the lift, but also how much distance you can shorten so that you can lift the heaviest weight possible in the least amount of time. For weightlifters, rather than doubling down on the overhead press variance in hopes of getting stronger that way, the bench press becomes a really useful tool in getting stronger. And it doesn't actually affect your overhead mobility the way that you might think it does. For powerlifters, it's all about contorting the body in ways to minimize the distance so that the bar needs to travel less and so they can use the most amount of weight possible. Whereas weightlifters need to be extremely good at catching the barbell over their head with lots of speed and lots of freedom of movement at the hips and the ankles, and even more at the shoulder joint. And I totally get it. Weightlifters couldn't care less about the bench press. It's just too irrelevant to their sport. From a movement perspective, weightlifters don't do anything that involves pressing the barbell in front of their body. Rather, they do everything where the barbell is caught and pressed over their head. Whether you're laying down like you would for a bench press or standing up like you would when you catch a lift over your head, all of the muscles used in the bench press, the triceps, pecs, anterior delts, and the deep muscles of the rotator cuff complex, they all work together to support the shoulder joint and make it a hell of a lot stronger. When we break it down, weightlifting is two distinct movements, and they're going to be the snatch and the clean and jerk. Both of those lifts demand a lot of overhead mobility and strength, and it's the very position that weightlifters are scared to lose control over. So let's take a look at mistake number one. Whether you're snatching or jerking the bar over your head, there's a little something happening at the shoulder blade, and that thing happening is called upward rotation, and it needs to occur. If you were to stand up straight with the arms by the side of your body, and then you raise your arm over your head, your shoulder blade has to come along for the ride, and it rotates upwards when it does so. The scapula or the shoulder blades are bony structures that they kind of look like your hand if you were to cup it slightly. And then the rib cage shares a very similar presentation itself. So here's the deal. When you do a lot of bench pressing, especially with a high arch, it begins to flatten out the backside of your rib cage. And over time, this can make it very hard for your shoulder blades to move around freely yet upwardly rotate. When you bench press with a high arch, you have to contort your body and really arch your back. Unfortunately, this causes the muscles that help arch your back and bring your shoulder blades closer together to get all bunched up and tight. And we've all been in a situation where you've been sitting around for a long time, right? It feels like forever. And then the second that you stand up, your hip flexors suddenly feel like they're frozen in place. It's not a great feeling. But the interesting part isn't that those muscles got tight because they were loaded. That they got tight because they found themselves in a position for a very long time. When you're doing the bench press with an arch, it's not like the muscles you're using to arch your back and squeeze your shoulder blades together are actually being loaded. But the longer you stay in the position and the more times you do it, the tighter those muscles become. It's kind of like sitting down for a long period of time. Then when you go back to weightlifting, you feel tightness in your overhead position and you blame the bench press or you blame tight pecs from the bench press. But actually, those muscles were intentionally shortened, which starts to present itself as an inability to move the arms over the head freely. So it's not the bench press that actually limits your overhead mobility. It's because you were trying to bench press like a powerlifter. Now, switching up your bench press technique can be pretty straightforward. All you need to do is just simply opt for a flat back bench position, or just focus less on trying to make an arch in your back. Another sweet option is the close grip bench press. You keep your hands a little bit closer and it doesn't feel quite as natural if you were to arch your back too much, so you're less likely going to do it from the start. But here's the thing. Using a closer grip on the barbell can also help you avoid mistake number two. For weightlifters or anyone else using the bench press to build upper body strength, hand position is something that you might want to pay a little bit more attention towards. Widening or narrowing your hand position won't necessarily determine which muscles you use more, but instead the position of the hands will affect what's actually happening at the shoulder joint and the arm bones themselves. Weightlifters, just like powerlifters, spend most of their time gripping a barbell. And this type of grip means that you spend a lot of time with your hands facing down. And this position is quite simply known as a pronated grip. This isn't a good or a bad grip, but this sort of grip just means that the arm bones are frequently exposed to a position which isn't helpful to an overhead position. When your hands are facing down, both of the forearm bones are turned inwards, and then this naturally causes the upper arm bone to turn inwards as well. And this couple motion here is called internal rotation. A wider grip means more internal rotation, whereas a narrower grip means more external rotation. Instead of shying away from the bench press, you just want to find pressing variations that allow for more external rotation to occur. And you just do this by choosing exercises that offer a larger range of motion. Exercises like dumbbell presses in varying degrees, they allow you to manipulate the hand width and the hand position so that when you're going through the range of motion of the exercise itself, you're training deeper ranges of shoulder extension and external rotation. Flat dumbbell pressing is one of those exercises that probably finds itself at the top of the list because it's very, very loadable. It's not too far from the traditional bench press itself. So for a main pressing option, the dumbbell flat press is most likely going to be your best friend. But then you can also adjust the degrees of pressing by simply opting for either low, mid, or high incline pressing. They're also bringing you a little closer to the overhead position. And you could just look at these as getting you a little closer to what's called specificity of the overhead position. But one of the more underrated pressing options is the dip. And we've all seen it before. We all know the Chinese weightlifters, and they are renowned for it. They're renowned for strapping literally their body weight and more, and doing the dip for sets and reps. The thing about the dip is that you're basically training in the same position that you find yourself overhead, which is going to be external rotation of the arm bones. It's just in the complete opposite direction. Now, to explain this a little bit easier, if you stood up again with the hands by the side of your body, as you raise your arms from here to here, the arm bones are externally rotated. Raising them a little bit further from here to here, the arm bones need to internally rotate. And then to get the arms back over the head, they need to go through external rotation again. So the idea is that we want to think less about which muscles are being used and what they're doing, and think more about the position that the bones find themselves in. That way we can just see it from a movement perspective rather than a muscular perspective. Now, some of this might be a lot of information for some of you, and it might even sound foreign or totally unorthodox, and I get it, I understand. So if you have any questions, please feel free to drop your comments below, and I'll do my best to respond to them. And of course, thanks so much for watching the video. If you liked it, hit the like button so that we can make sure we continue to deliver information that you find helpful.